Imagine playing tug of war with a fully grown grizzly bear. Only the thing you're holding isn't a dog toy, it's your own arm, and firing multiple shots at the bear does nothing to stop it. This is the terrifying true story of how two best hunter mates saved each other's lives, both determined the other should live. On Sunday, September 1st, 2024, best mates Riley Hill and Braxton Myers headed to the Caribou-Targhee National Forest in southeastern Idaho for some elk hunting. Little did they know that it ended up being a hunt like no other. Braxton's 17-year-old brother, Boone, and his friend jumped into the vehicle with them. And so, they drove around half an hour up the Continental Divide Trail from US Highway 20 until they came to Schoolhouse Ridge. It was the perfect location to spot elk from. Boone and his friend climbed out of the vehicle whilst Riley and Braxton continued along the trail a little way. They pulled up, grabbed their bows, and began hiking along a small canyon. They had set some trail cameras a couple of weeks before and had seen several elk, so they were hopeful that it was going to be a successful hunt. They didn't expect what happened next. Riley trod quietly along the path with Braxton a few yards behind. They had spotted a clearing up ahead. It was early morning, 7:20 a.m., the perfect time to spot some elk. Silently, the two friends stepped forward, peering beyond the trees. But before they could see what was in the clearing, they heard a loud thud and then a crack of branches. Something big was coming. They had inadvertently disturbed the king of the hill. This was a 20-year-old grizzly bear who had dominated the area for so long he had earned himself a reputation. He had hunted cattle on the surrounding farms and destroyed property nearby. He was enormous and he was dominant, and the two young men had startled him just as he was settling down in his daybed. With one ear torn off from a previous fight, the king of the hill hadn't heard Riley and Braxton approaching until they were almost upon him. He thundered out of the undergrowth, appearing from nowhere. All Braxton had time to do was to shout, "Bear!" to alert Riley. His pistol was in a concealed holster. He didn't have time to pull it out, but he knew that Riley might be able to get a shot in if he lured the bear away from his friend. With the bear just a foot away from him, in full charge and about to lunge on top of him, Braxton turned and sprinted as fast as he could back along the trail away from Riley. But he only made it a few feet before he tripped and fell to the ground. Riley had seen the bear careering out of the trees and launching itself at his best friend. In one swift movement, he dropped his bow and immediately yanked his 10mm Springfield from its holster and fired at the bear. The bullet struck the animal in its right side. It immediately stopped and glared at Riley. Riley then watched in horror as the bear bounded towards him. With the bear charging down, Riley managed to squeeze his trigger 3 more times, hitting the bear's face and shoulder. But that didn't stop the beast. It was in full attack mode, and it was stopping at nothing until it had neutralized the threat. At the last second, Riley turned away from the bear to duck behind a tree, but the bear seized his right arm and yanked him backwards with such force that Riley was pulled off his feet. Now, the king of the hill had him in his grip, and he wasn't letting go. Riley screamed out as he was flung from side to side, shaken like a rag doll. He was entirely at the mercy of the king. Braxton was just getting to his feet. For a split second, he couldn't make out what was happening. He had heard Riley's gunshots as the bear chased him, but he had fully expected to feel the bear's sharp teeth and claws devouring him when he tripped and fell. It was unusual for a bear to turn and leave its original target to pursue another one. He scrambled to his feet and his eyes bulged wide when he saw the bear further along the trail. The animal was straddling his best friend. All he could see was Riley's head and shoulders in between the bear's front paws and Riley's legs sticking out from underneath the bear's belly. Seeing his friend like that shook Braxton to the core. He fumbled about for his sidearm and pulled out his Taurus 1911-45 ACP pistol. He immediately began firing at the bear, striking him with each shot. Riley, lying on the cold, hard ground, could feel the bear recoil slightly as the bullet sunk into his body. But the bear kept biting down. He kept ripping and tugging at Riley's arm. There was no let-up until Braxton ran up to the bear and shot it repeatedly at point-blank range. At that moment, the bear loosened its grip on Riley, and he immediately prized open the bear's jaws and ripped his arm out of its mouth. Riley quickly scrambled to his feet. He saw his pistol on the ground and grabbed it, firing 3 more shots into the bear just to make sure it was dead. But Braxton knew they weren't out of the woods yet. Riley had been attacked for just 30 seconds, but it was the longest, most terrifying 30 seconds of his life, and the damage could have been fatal. Braxton could see blood dripping off the end of Riley's right hand, but he didn't know how badly injured he was. Carefully, he helped Riley take off his long-sleeve shirt to assess the damage. That's when they realized that it was bad. The bear had torn and shredded Riley's arm as it hung from his body. Braxton grabbed his belt and tied it tightly around Riley's upper arm. Now, they'd get Riley some urgent medical attention. Braxton dialed 911. His brother, Boone, had heard the gunshots from a mile away. He knew instantly that something bad had happened as they were supposed to be bow hunting, not using their guns. Braxton sent him a pin drop of their location, and Boone sprinted off to find them, covering the distance in just 7 minutes. When he arrived, he was shocked to see the enormous brown bear lying crumpled on the ground and Riley with his arm wrapped in a shirt and 2 belts. The 3 of them immediately began the uphill hike back to their vehicle. Now the pain started kicking in for Riley. He had been fueled on adrenaline up until that point, but now that was wearing off, and that's not all. Every 15 steps or so, blood poured from his arm. He was worried he was losing too much blood. His heart was pounding in his chest. The hike soon became one of the hardest of his life, but spurred on by his friends, he made it back to the vehicle and they climbed in, scouting an open area for the emergency helicopter to land. It wasn't long before they heard the familiar whirring of the helicopter, and it came into view. Riley was airlifted to Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Hospital, where he received 40 staples and numerous stitches in his arm. He was lucky that the bear didn't sever an artery. He was even more lucky that his best friend was there to shoot the bear. It took 24 bullets to take down the king of the hill. The 2 friends felt terrible for killing such an impressive creature who had roamed that region for 2 decades, but in the end, it was him or them. In September 2021, Daniel and Ethan arrived in Wyoming, excited for the elk hunt of a lifetime. The 2 had been hunting together for years, but this trip was special. Daniel had drawn a rare elk tag for a unit just outside of Yellowstone, and he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. The South Dakota native had fallen in love with elk hunting back in 2016. An arborist by trade and a dedicated family man, Daniel was the type of person who split his time between work, hunting, and preparing for the next big adventure. After years of hunting deer and other game, he set his sights on elk, traveling to Colorado year after year until he finally took down his first bull. That moment sealed his obsession. Elk hunting was in his blood, but hunting in Wyoming meant dealing with more than just elk. Everyone knew this was grizzly country, and Daniel was well aware of the risks. That's why he spent months preparing. When he found out he'd drawn the tag, Daniel didn't waste any time choosing the right weapon for the trip. He settled on a Remington 700, a powerful, accurate gun that packed enough punch to drop an elk, or, if necessary, defend against a grizzly. He had considered carrying a sidearm as well, but figured his rifle would be his best chance if he ever had to face off with a predator. Daniel knew that simply owning a rifle wasn't enough. If he was going to depend on it in a life or death situation, he had to train like his life depended on it. Every day he practiced drawing, aiming, and firing as quickly as possible. He drilled scenarios where he was caught off guard, simulating the sudden chaos of an ambush. By the time September arrived, he was as ready as he could be. The first day of the hunt was uneventful. Despite the stunning landscape of Wyoming's rugged wilderness, elk were proving elusive. Daniel had taken a shot at a bull, but it escaped into the thick timber. The following day, the two hunters climbed higher, hoping for better luck. They weren't alone. As they pushed through dense timber, they noticed fresh bear sign, huge claw marks on trees, turned over logs, and fresh scat. They were in grizzly territory, and that meant they had to be on high alert. Then came the noise, a violent rustling in the trees ahead, followed by a roar that shook them to their core. Daniel and Ethan instinctively shouted, "Bear!" Before Daniel could fully process what was happening, a massive grizzly exploded from the brush. He barely had time to react before the beast was nearly on top of him. With his rifle already in hand, his instincts took over. Daniel squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out, kicking up dirt just in front of the bear. It didn't even slow down. Realizing this was no bluff charge, he fired again. The bear flinched but kept coming. By the time he fired his fifth shot, Daniel was falling backward. Ethan had been just behind Daniel when the attack began. As soon as he saw the bear charging, he pulled out his bear spray and unleashed a cloud of burning mist into the air. But the wind had different plans. The spray blew straight back into Ethan's face, blinding him instantly. He stumbled back, coughing and gagging. Still, despite the burning in his eyes, he didn't hesitate. He lifted his own rifle and fired twice into the charging bear. Daniel, now on the ground, realized that his foot was in the way of his next shot. He had seconds to adjust before the bear was on him. Twisting his body, he steadied the .365 Winchester, aimed, and fired his seventh shot. The bear, now bleeding heavily, dropped onto all fours and prepared for one last lunge. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Ethan's final shot had hit it square in the chest. The massive grizzly turned, staggered, and lumbered back toward the trees. The two men yelled at the bear, trying to scare it off. It sat back on its haunches 90 yards away, watching them. Daniel fired another shot, striking it in the hindquarters. Finally, the grizzly disappeared into the trees. Daniel and Ethan immediately radioed authorities, reporting the attack. Game wardens arrived shortly after and tracked the bear, finding its body deep in the forest. Upon investigation, they discovered something heartbreaking. The bear was a female with a cub. The cub's tracks were nearby, meaning the mother had likely been in defense mode when she attacked. Without her, the cub had little chance of survival. Daniel felt a pang of guilt, but he also knew there had been no other choice. If he hadn't reacted as quickly as he did, neither of them would have survived. The authorities ruled the shooting self-defense, acknowledging that Daniel's quick reflexes had saved his life. Sitting by the fire that night, Daniel reflected on what had just happened. He had trained for this moment, but nothing could have truly prepared him for staring death in the face. His Remington 700 had held its ground, but it had taken 7 shots to stop the bear. That was a hard lesson about the sheer toughness of these animals. Would he return to the wilderness? Absolutely. But next time, he'd be even more prepared. Because in the wild, second chances don't come easy.